The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Securing your recycling in a few steps is simple, like bundling your cardboard separately. These bundles can act as a lid for your blue box or placing heavier items such as magazines on top of papers with no material above the rim.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Talk Politics. I'm Deborah Hutchison in the Rogers TV studio. Joining us today via video is Durham MP Erin O'Toole. Erin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Deborah.
How are you doing, first off? How are you and your family coping in the times of COVID?
Thank you for asking. We're well, we're healthy. And we're overcoming and persevering like all families are. This is a difficult time, and certainly we're blessed because we're all healthy, we're together, and we're doing our best to come up with the school routine and all the things that most families across Durham and across country really are facing. And we're doing our work for the citizens of my riding virtually, all of us. It's been the busiest time ever, actually, for MPs in terms of consular cases, constituents on the cruise ships and caught overseas. So I've been very fortunate that I have an amazing team, and we've tried our best to help everyone. And now we're dealing with businesses and farms and some of the economic aspects of the crisis. And we're here to serve, and this is an important time. And so I'm very fortunate I have an amazing team, too.
Well, let's start off with some very distressing news with the downed Canadian military helicopter. That was your old squadron.
Yes, the news broke yesterday when I was in the House of Commons. I got sent a text that there were reports of a Canadian helicopter from HMCS Fredericton that was missing and presumed down off of Greece. And pit forms in your stomach, because even though I've been gone from the squadron for many years now, it's like a family. The RCAF, and particularly 423 Maritime Helicopter Squadron in Shearwater, Nova Scotia. So I'm wearing my pin today, and my old friends through Facebook last night, we're sending our prayers because there's a search and rescue for some of the people missing, and we hope they can be found. The water temperature and the equipment you wear can help people survive. But already the early reports, one of the young naval officers that died serving our country from Peterborough, she went to Royal Military College, was in Air Cadets there, just tragedy. And so for Nova Scotia, it's already reeling from the terrible attack. The squadron and the ship are from Halifax and Shearwater. So our thoughts and prayers are with the military family tonight.
And of course, your family, your wife is from Nova Scotia. So the massacre in Nova Scotia, that hit close to home as well.
It did. The suspect was finally taken down literally about 15 minutes from where my wife grew up and where her family are in Fall River, Nova Scotia. And during the period of isolation, it made a terrible tragedy like that even worse, because we all feel so cut off from our family and our friends and our wider community that you couldn't reach out and give her mom a hug or her sister. And just the tragedy of an RCMP officer. I was speaking to some RCMP friends in Nova Scotia that knew Constable Stevenson quite well. It's just heart-wrenching when there's a terrible and senseless act of violence like this. So Nova Scotia Strong has been trending. My wife, Rebecca, joined me on one of my little videos sending our condolences, and that's how everyone is doing it. I have a friend who's an MPP in Queen's Park. He just lost his mother, and they had to do the sort of funeral and visitation by video conference, by Zoom. So it's a very unnerving time. So we all have to look after our friends and family and stay in touch, even through broadcasts like you're doing, Deborah, to make sure that we as a society don't lose track of the people that might be suffering in silence. And it has been a particularly hard few weeks for Nova Scotia.
in talking about social isolation and doing things virtually, I just want to quickly mention you have a mental health event that you host yearly, and that will be done virtually May 6th.
Yes, thank you. The Sam Sharp Mental Health Breakfast for Veterans and First Responders. It's in its 7th year. I started this as a brand new MP with Romeo Dallaire, who was a Liberal senator at the time. So there's no politics. And of course, Sam Sharp was from Uxbridge, as you know, and was an MP who died as a result of his mental injuries from the Great War. And he's been remembered so well in his community and by the Ontario Regiment. And we didn't want the isolation and COVID-19 to stop our important discussions about how veterans and first responders have found treatment, have gotten well, because we hear so many stories about the tragedy and suicides, and every one of those is a missed opportunity to help someone. So we wanted to make sure that we had our ability to talk about mental health not interrupted. So we're doing a Zoom. We're not doing a breakfast because we're not serving breakfast, but we're asking veterans and mental health advocates, and we'll have several hundred people on this call. You bring your own coffee, and you're going to hear an inspiring story from a retired general named Charlie Bouchard, who's going to talk about his own journey with mental health. And I think that reduces stigma to show, just like Sam Sharp, who was the commanding officer years ago, generals, privates, captains, corporals, it doesn't matter. Anyone can be hit by mental health, by an injury or a condition. And the more we talk about it, we reduce the stigma and we let people get help. So on May 6th, we're going to have this Zoom conference to talk about mental health during Mental Health Week. And I think this year with isolation, it's more important than ever to make sure we don't let these events slip by because of the crisis.
Now, we are taping this April 30th. Yesterday, you were back in the House. A very different kind of setup. Was it kind of eerie not having a lot of people there?
Yes, it was. It was certainly very different. Everyone was spaced apart, as we should have the social distancing practices. It was a bit surreal. We'd had a virtual session the day before that seemed almost too scripted because of course, you can only talk with a few bubbles and it's hard for really to have a debate in a room. So yesterday was the first real day, and I was proud to be there representing Durham and representing my colleagues. So we only had about 14 or 15 conservatives out of 121, and each party in a prorated basis had fewer people there. So it was a bit eerie having a somewhat empty chamber, but I think we made our points. We improved their bill on student relief. I asked some questions about seniors, about doing the student relief better by helping create jobs for farms and small businesses. I think we tried to work with the government. They've been responding to a crisis, and I've saluted when they've done that. There's also a lot of very poor planning into some of the policies, and that's what we tried to bring yesterday to continue to improve our response. We can work together by being accountable.
Well, let's talk about seniors. Here in Durham Region, Orchard Villa in Pickering has basically become the epicenter for deaths in long-term care homes in Ontario, if not of all of Canada. The military, luckily, has been called in to help, along with Lakeridge Health, but you feel the government should be doing more in this respect with the military?
Well, I asked for the military to be stood up over a month ago. I actually used the term war footing. We should adopt a war footing and really make sure we have the services and supports where needed. Our military has something called the Disaster Assistance Response Team, DART, which goes to earthquakes and floods around the world. We have field ambulance crews across the country with medics and doctors and nurses. I wanted that to get stood up because we were worried about both the primary healthcare system being overwhelmed. Fortunately, the response there allowed us to be ready, including Lakeridge. I've been talking to Dr. Tony Stone literally every other day or so for the last month about PPE and other things for Lakeridge. But we were also worried that long-term care and seniors care would be overwhelmed as well. And so I said the military should be there and ready early because we were worried we would be overwhelmed. And we've had the military provide aid to the civil power for everything from floods to snow blizzards. And certainly this is even more critical. So our military is professional. in rare occasions, they should be called up to help save lives. And that's literally what can be done here, particularly after weeks of the frontline people, the nurses, the PSWs, and others who are literally overwhelmed trying to keep up with need. So I'm really thankful for the great work done on the front lines. And we have to continue to make sure we keep vulnerable seniors protected.
There's also been a lot of talk that the government didn't act fast enough to close our borders. It's so easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, but how do you feel about this?
You're right. I think at the appropriate time, we will have a very deep dive. This has been the biggest health and economic crisis our country has faced in over a century and a half. Let's not kid ourselves. The Second World War, the front lines weren't here. They were elsewhere. And we're going to see an economic disruption bigger than the Great Depression of the 30s. So we have to make sure we learn the lessons. I am disappointed, Deborah. I started talking about a coronavirus response in the end of February. I was hearing from folks in the military. I was hearing from folks in the Chinese Canadian community warning that this pandemic risk was real. And I put out a detailed plan on March 2nd about stopping all flights from hot countries, real medical screening at airports, and control of the border. I said at the time on March 2nd, we should have a series of quarantine measures and isolation and get the EI system ready for the requirement to do more. When I said that and used the term war footing, I was actually mocked for those positions. There were articles written saying I was saying this because of my leadership bid. Had we followed that, who knows whether that earlier action would have reduced the community spread. I'm not blaming anyone, but we certainly have to make sure we have some accountability for what went right, what went wrong. I've been working with the government on securing PPE for Lake Ridge, for bringing PPE mask manufacturing back to Canada from Asia. I've been working with a company at Kitchener-Waterloo trying to make that in Ontario. I've been working with Premier Ford and his government directly. So I'm willing to lend a hand and praise as well. But in the military, we had a term called an after-action report. If you don't learn what went wrong, you are potentially going to repeat those errors. So I'd like to see some accountability because I do think the response to both the health and economic crisis was too slow, too confused, and it's made both crises worse than they should have been.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. We're going to take a quick break. We'll have more of our conversation with Durham MP Erin O'Toole after this.
Securing your recycling in a few steps is simple, like crushing your cans and bottles down in your container's blue box and your box board down in your papers box. This saves a lot of space and reduces the possibility of material blowing out of your blue box on windy days.
Hello, I'm Liz Dowdswell, Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. In 2008, carbon monoxide, a deadly invisible gas, killed an entire family in our province. That tragedy led to a new law requiring homes with potential CO sources to have alarms. John Gignac's family members passed away that day, and he shares his story to save others.
Please make sure you have working CO alarms in your home. Protect your family today.
What brought me here was the opportunity for me to expand my skills and professional career. I have the opportunity to do everything. By being here at Rogers, I can learn all these different things that will help me be stronger. Don't be afraid, because this is where you're going to gain the most valuable experience that you can use in your future. My name is Stacey McLean, and I'm a volunteer here at Rogers TV.
On this brand new edition of Social Life from Home, our special guest, fitness trainer Farzi from Fit Warriors, shares his at-home workout tips.
Plus, we share some fun things you can do at home, from DIY to 3D animals.
And welcome back to Talk Politics. Our guest this week joining us via video is Durham MP Erin O'Toole. When we went to break, of course, we were talking about COVID-19 and the federal government's response. You've been very critical of the Chinese government. You say, in an opinion poll you wrote, you said we're on the brink of a new Cold War with China. How so?
Well, the similarities are eerie, Deborah. You know, the last Cold War that happened as the Iron Curtain fell, as Winston Churchill said, was Soviet communism and its often hidden struggle against the West and Western democracies. We see that now with the Communist Party in China. And I've been talking about this for several years, Deborah. In fact, on my Facebook page, I reposted a question I asked Justin Trudeau 2 years ago on China manipulating the WHO and not allowing Taiwan to participate in pandemic planning. Never did I ever think we would have a pandemic a few years later where Taiwan's exclusion and Chinese using the WHO to sort of hide the early response to coronavirus would be such a hot topic. But many of us have seen the way China has manipulated multilateral organizations, the World Health Organization, the Civil Aviation Organization, another UN agency. They've manipulated trade, the World Trade Organization. In fact, the US, starting with Obama, but going through President Trump, has been arguing about Chinese dumping of steel and aluminum that's hurt Canada. It led to the tariffs that were imposed. So it's interesting. In December, a motion that I put forward was the first defeat for Trudeau in the House, and it was establishing an all-party committee to review Canada-China relations. This is in December. So this is something I've been calling out for years, because the rise of the new Communist Party in China and its dominance of world organizations, it now has ambitions in the Arctic, is something the Western world has to be attuned to. We can't be naive when it comes to Huawei and our 5G network. When it comes to Hong Kong or the situation with Uyghurs, I think it's up to countries like Canada to work with our allies to make sure that we hold some degree of accountability for the Communist Party's actions.
How does a party like that, though, manipulate the World Health Organization? You've been quoted as saying that they're as corrupt as the government.
Absolutely. Well, the WHO, due to Chinese pressure, has kept Taiwan off of full participation in World Health Organization planning. So remember, you hear some people, including the Trudeau government, saying the World Health Organization is non-political. It's about our only way of working together in a pandemic. That is true. But when certain larger members of the UN can enforce their political agenda and the WHO caves to that, that should concern people, because that's putting politics, Chinese politics, ahead of global pandemic planning. As I said, I asked about this in the House 2 years ago about excluding Taiwan, because Taiwan was a country like Canada that 18 years ago was impacted by SARS. And our lessons learned from SARS should have been that all countries, particularly those in Asia that can be the early front lines of an outbreak, should be part of the global response. What's interesting, Taiwan's been pushed and excluded by the Communist Party of China, but Taiwan's results in terms of COVID-19 are actually better than most of the world. So I really think there's a missed opportunity. The Secretary General of the WHO has in many ways been promoted and supported by the Chinese leadership. China has a Belt and Road initiative where they curry favor with smaller countries of the world, building things for them, acquiring debts, and then they leverage that. We've got to look at the world as it really is and not how we would love it to be. And that's Justin Trudeau's main problem when it comes to China. He made comments saying that he admired the basic dictatorship because it gets things done. It gets things done all right, often in ways that don't respect human rights or the rule of law. And it's up to countries like ours to say, look, it's important to trade and to have engagement with China, but we also have to push when we feel they're manipulating trade, human rights, the rule of law. The longer we allow them to operate with impunity, the more we will see corruption. So we have to work with our allies to curtail some of their actions.
So did the Canadian government rely too heavily then on the World Health Organization for, I guess, the decisions that it has made in regarding to COVID-19?
Yes.
What were its other options?
I now know, Deborah, of 3 departments of the federal government were aware of significant pandemic risks to Canada in January. And in mid-March, Minister Haiju was still saying, don't worry, be happy. We don't need to close the borders. We don't need to restrict travel. We sent personal protective equipment, this PPE that everyone knows about now. We sent that to China in February as part of their efforts to gather and almost corner the PPE market. And I think that was in large part because we weren't getting a clear and open message on the risks of transmission from the WHO until at least weeks, maybe months after we could have had that information. And it's not just me. A former Liberal minister, Irwin Cotler, a world-renowned human rights expert, wrote a scathing essay relying on data that said 95% of the global cases of COVID-19 could have been avoided if China and the WHO had been more forthright immediately with the outbreak.
So going forward, should we not believe anything the WHO says?
No, but if we believe in multilateral organizations like the UN, Canada was a founding nation of the UN, and we're a founding NATO nation, we're a NORAD nation, we're a Five Eyes nation for security with our closest allies. We need to improve organizations that are failing or that have been corrupted in some way or another. We are a proud leading middle democratic power that has leverage through our friendships. NATO would not exist were it not for Canada bringing the United States and Europe together. Winston Churchill called us the linchpin. I think there's a lot we can do reforming and improving international organizations that have been, I'd say, co-opted or gamed by some bad actors. And it's not just, the Communist Party of China. Syria chaired a UN conference on disarmament a few years ago. And Syria is the only country in the last decade to use chemical weapons on its own people. So why was it chairing something on disarmament? We've seen Saudi Arabia on human rights councils for the United Nations, and they have one of the worst human rights records. So we shouldn't let the UN be gamed by the bad players. If we want it to be the pinnacle of global multilateral work to avoid pandemics, to help the poor, to bring peace, we can't let the various agencies be captured by people that really don't want it to fulfill its mandate. And this has been happening for years. I've seen it with peacekeeping. Think of Rwanda. Romeo Dallaire, my friend, the Rwanda mission was a failure because of UN politics. And so I think we need to improve the body, work with other democratic, like-minded countries to make sure that it fulfills its potential.
One thing that has been affected by the COVID-19 outbreak, of course, was the Conservative leadership campaign. You had to put the brakes on it for a while.
Yeah, it went into a state of hibernation. They canceled the June date and stopped fundraising and a range of things. And I was asking for that to happen. We saw the COVID crisis coming. As I said, I called for major actions at the end of February, early March. And when it became apparent that we were going to see a major effort to plank the curve and to shut down schools and businesses, we wanted to make sure that all Canadians, including Conservative Party members, including MPs like myself, could focus on the crisis. And I'm glad the party did agree. And just in the last few days, the party has now announced a new date, August 23rd. Our leader will be selected. Our campaigns will now be coming kind of out of hibernation. And before the campaign went into this sort of pause period, I had support from Premier Kenney from Alberta. My campaign was having real momentum, and we hope to recapture that. But my priorities for Durham and my role as an MP are always paramount for me. And so as the race ramps back up, I'll be able to talk about a lot of the issues that I'm really passionate about and that people in Durham know me for. So our party hasn't had an Ontario leader since 1948. I think we've never had one from the GTA or from the Durham region. I think it would be good, and I'm going to give it my best using the values and skills I learned in Durham itself.
And of course, the debates that will happen will probably have to be done virtually, yes?
Yeah, so the details will come on that. We've seen even Parliament do a virtual session. It was a bit confusing, but with 4 candidates in this race, I think you can have a socially distanced debate streamed or made available online or through cable. The party will determine how best to do that, and I look forward to that because I've been putting out some strong policy. I'm certainly proud of the team I'm building, the record I have in Parliament and as a minister and before politics, my time in the military and the private sector. Canada's going to be facing the biggest challenge of all of our lifetimes. And how do we get back to prosperity after COVID-19 amid a new normal? I think the Liberal government, which was already running deficits in good times, and has made the response a little bit worse from slow and unsteady actions. I think we're really going to need a principled, strong leader and government to get Canada back on track, and that's what I'm going to be offering.
We've only got about 2 minutes left, but I did want to ask you about their response, the CERB, the money that they have had to spend. They did it quickly, and for all accounts, the CERB has been a success story. How do you feel about how they handled?
Well, they should have moved faster for small business. So the CERB, we improved the CERB because there was going to be a lot of people that had some casual work excluded from the CERB. So thankfully, I praised the Liberals when they listened to our input and made the CERB more inclusive. But what they should have moved much faster on was the rent supports and support for small business, including the wage subsidy. In fact, businesses still haven't received the wage subsidy. It's only been this week that they could actually apply for it. We need to preserve as many jobs as possible and help smaller businesses with rent and a range of things. The loan that they structured for small business, a lot of independent small operators and restaurants and things weren't eligible. We had wanted them to use the banks to put the money and liquidity out. We wanted the government to actually refund GST to give businesses, especially restaurants and small operators in Durham, liquidity in this crisis. They didn't do that. I think it's going to mean the crisis is deeper. It's going to mean more people, Deborah, are on the CERB benefit. So I'm glad it's there. Some things have gone well, but some things were done very poorly and slowly, and I think it's going to make the economic crisis deeper.
I'm going to have to stop you there. We are totally out of time. Erin O'Toole, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to you, our viewers, for joining us. Until next time, stay home, stay safe.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will endeavor to describe the feeling on this ship.
The American ship is just trailing the Blue Nose.
Angus should never have agreed to this last race. She's too old.
Ready? Coming in there! Johnson, halyard back! Get to it, Matt! Here's there's some kind of difficulty.
Seems to be something loose up there, I believe.
The topsail's foul!
Just once more, old girl, and you can rest.
She's holding her lead.
Her last race and still undefeated, the Blue Nose out of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia was fastest in the world for almost 20 years.
The economic impact of COVID-19 has drastically affected food banks across Canada.